Mor, hvorfor er du sort? Mom, why are you black? When you talk about representation and you talk about history and you talk about race and you're in a society that actually would rather not talk about those things, that's where the silencing and the erasure comes from. There's very little understanding. Mor, hvorfor er du ikke hvid? Mom, why are you not white?
I guess it's the times now that somehow we could raise our voices in a different way than it was possible maybe 10 years ago, because when I started working with these things, there were not a lot of people talking about this. It's only 100 years ago since the Danish nation sold the Virgin Islands to the US. But we were actually a colonial power in the Virgin Islands for 250 years. So we were there longer than we have not been there. So it's a long time. And that's also one of the reasons why I started working around these issues, because when I realized how involved the Danes were, it kind of blew my mind, and I was really shocked that I didn't learn anything in school about this, or just, in our culture. It's not present at all. So that's how I started digging into our colonial history. And I also, of course, realized that a lot of Danes, they're completely de-linked from that part of our nation's history. So we're trying to unveil now all the stuff and to rearrange and to rewrite history. Most of the sculptures that are in public space in Denmark, they represent white males. I think it's like 98%, so it's a lot. This is the first statue that represents a black woman, a woman resisting. So it's very, very important. It's an important statement from us as the artists to have done this. And it represents alternative narrative to the agenda that has been dominating the Western world for centuries. I Am Queen Mary is a collaborative project between the visual artist Lavon Bell and myself. Lavon Bell is based in St. Croix in the Caribbean, and I'm based here. So it's a hybrid project where we're combining not only our bodies but our narratives as well as our artistic practices. She was together with 3 other queens. She was one of the leaders of what is called the Fire Burn, which was a revolt against the working conditions, and they imprisoned them here in Denmark. So she was here. She was in Christianshavn, in the women's prison. Of course, we knew that it would be something people would talk about a little bit, but we never really, we didn't expect that much international attention, and it's fantastic because it not only talks to the Danish context, it really opens up to talk in a global context, and it's apparently it was very needed.
I am here now. Broken mirrors repaired, inhuman stares. I see potentiality asleep, awakened from a slumber that seems ancient, historical, short-term memory robbed of true story, love, and harmony. I am here now.
It's not possible actually now for tourists going on the canal without noticing the huge sculpture. I Am Queen Mary is a really strong symbol also of the political resistance, both now but also in the past. So it's a dialogue between who was the one resisting Danish colonial power back then, and how do we use that to strengthen ourselves for the struggle that we are engaged in.
We chose the medium of a magazine to address colonial amnesia.
Marronage is an anti-colonial magazine bringing forth narratives about resistance.
well, Marronage refers to, was a name given to runaway enslaved people in the plantations. Maroons, yeah. That then, as they fled or escaped from the plantations, they built societies of their own in the mountains or in the jungles, and then they also used them to wage war against plantation society.
Yeah. So actually, marronage is also sort of like an encouragement, because we use it as like a verb, like the act of marronage, sort of like organized resistance in a way.
The Breach Radio.
Firstly, it's not colonial history, it's colonial present. For me, the radio is about bringing people together to talk about the issues that they know about and to bring out voices that are not heard in the mainstream media.
To create a space where people are not the objects of the radio show, people are the producers of the radio show. Yeah. And the radio shows that we make are not about migrants, but about the camps, deportations, different cultural backgrounds, music, poetry, different resistance organizations, different migrant unions.
You are afraid sometimes to talk about some of the issue, but in the British radio we kind of like try to feeling free in some way. We got the knowledge and how we can use communication as a tool of telling people the truth about migration in general, because when we talk about migration, it's so big and so many things to talk, and we will decide we can use podcast as a tool of communication.
It's still podcast, but we do it as a live setting, so you don't need to edit so much.
Exactly.
So it's more like producing it together. It feels like really a community, and when you're done, it's really nice, and you have this, there's some intensity of the live aspect also that is not so much in video. And of course the privacy issue. And it's not to get more migrant in and talk, but it's just to make it accessible as a starting point for people who want to share.
My activism, I would say, is more focused on bringing attention to people's stories. I work in education, and I work with a lot of refugees and a lot of Danes who aren't usually represented in the media. And my interest in my life right now is really inspiring these people to tell their own stories. I know words can really cause people a lot of discomfort. It can cause people a lot of comfort. It can really move things, and that's why I'm in it. I wrote the book, Decolonial Daughter, Letters from a Black Woman to Her European Son, because I wanted my son to not only know of his familial history, but also the historical context for where we came, and also the larger historical context in terms of Europe's relationship to the rest of the world, and how I and many other people experience and also see it. My father was a musician, so I grew up with a very profound understanding of art. And when I was very young, I don't know why, but because I read. I had books as a child, and I had decided that I was going to be a writer. And I mean, I must have been around, 4 or 5. I told my parents, I declared to them that when I grow up, I'll be a writer. And I have said it ever since. I understood the power of it. And then when I came to Denmark, I started a blog. It was in 2007. Blogging was relatively new. And as a publishing professional, I had recognized the power of it, because to publish is to make public. And here we were with this technology where I could write something and have an immediate audience. And I was very fascinated by that. So I started Black Girl on Mars to speak about the whole idea of alienation, because as a child growing up in an ex-colony and parents, of that legacy as well, I understood on an intimate level what alienation meant, especially being a black person in Denmark. And I realized that alienation is actually a quite universal feeling. Representation, I think, is all about, not that we need permission, but it's like a blessing. It helps exercise your imagination. Seeing things in front of us that look like us, it helps us, it's inspiring. So, for example, when I was 10 years old and sent to live in Trinidad for the first time, I saw a black president and prime minister, and I was like, wow, you can have that. And mind you, all throughout Africa and other places in the Caribbean, this has been the case, but as a young girl growing up in America, I did not know that was possible. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, that really inspired my imagination. So that is actually the power of it, and that's why it's really important that we have a very diverse representation of who we are and who we can be.
If you don't get a positive representation in public space or on TV, how do you reflect upon yourself, and how do you mirror yourself if you don't have anything? I mean, growing up here with only white representation, of course, did something to my understanding of self. And also, it's just that when you finally see it, when I started traveling as a young child and I started noticing other places that had black people, I started to wonder why. And also, it's very obvious that this is a very white place. But even though it's a white place, we also have people of color here, so we should also have representation, of course.
There is an under and a misrepresentation in Danish public sphere when it comes to people of color. It's very common that a person of color would never talk about like subjects, like different kind of academia subject matters. You would always be casted as one talking about your emotions and your feelings and how it is felt to be a victim.
It's not because mainstream media never talks about it, but it talks about them as objects, and objects that are cast into playing the role of two different stereotypes, which is like either a criminal or dangerous subject, a threat to the nation state, or a like vulnerable and helpless person who needs the help of a white savior state. So this is not about just representing more, but about doing something completely differently and changing the power of who talks about what.
There are sisters like Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Maurice Condé, Nikki Giovanni, Jamaica Kincaid, Lauryn Hill, and Erykah Badu. And if it gets really hard to remember who you are amidst all the MTV hoochies, then turn off your TV. And if it really gets hard to remember who you are, put faces on the wall. Pictures of Angela Davis raising her fist, Harriet Tubman, Nella Larson. You taking notes, right? Nanny of the Maroons, Sojourner Truth, Phyllis Whitley, Pulan Devi. Girl, remember not to forget yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and say that today, I'ma be myself, despite. And if you listen to your heart, you know what I mean. And that's how we survive through memory. And this is the Black Girls Survival Guide for Tough Living in Copenhagen.